Hello, does this work? Okay, let's avoid this guy. He's not happy this morning. Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Julie Schumacher. I'm Assistant Vice President for Community Engagement and Government Affairs here at the university. I'm going to move far away from this. So really glad to have you here this morning. We normally do State of Scranton seminars once a semester, and we have been Zooming them, as all of us have been Zooming for a long time now, so we're really glad to be able to be back together this morning. So this is our fall 2021 State of Scranton seminar that we focused on housing. So really thinking about housing from a lot of different angles and working together with NeighborWorks NEPA, and also the Scranton Area Community Foundation, and of course many of you in this room obviously are very much engaged in these issues. I wanted to say a little bit about kind of the context for having this event today, because it's really an outgrowth of a lot of community efforts, community conversations that are longstanding and really ongoing. So 2 years ago, some of you might remember that we were in the same room to launch the living wage study of 2019, looking at those kinds of issues around economic insecurity. And one of the things that we discovered at that point was that between 2016 and 2019, the housing costs for those facing economic insecurity in our region had gone up 20%. And so that was kind of something that we really noted. We did that with the Institute for Public Policy and Economic Development. I know Terry and Andrew are here today. And so we were recommending steps at that point to address housing affordability. Then in the spring of 2020, right before the pandemic, the Scranton Area Foundation brought some of us together again to think about housing, and a number of organizations from the region began participating in a cohort program of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, and really thinking about equity in terms of housing, and especially focusing on barriers for communities of color. So now, here we are, kind of fast forward to today, and we're looking at, I think, hopefully emerging from the pandemic. And I think we have a kind of combination of both challenges and opportunities in relation to housing that have become, in a sense, more urgent, and I think hopefully give us a kind of range of opportunities. We know that we continue to need development and investment and tax revenue in the city of Scranton. Good news this morning that it looks like after 30 years, I'm looking at Eileen, that the city is poised to come out of Act 47. I was saying to others that on a personal note, I think was this year that my own housing value in the hill section of Scranton went up, which it had never done. And I have neighbors on my street that moved here from New York City during the pandemic, so interesting developments that have taken place because of the pandemic. And then at the same time, those needs that we saw 2 years ago around affordable housing have really become even more critical and even more urgent. So those are the kinds of conversations we want to have today, thinking about how do we grow and invest as a community in a way that ensures that all of our neighbors have access to a safe and welcoming place to live. We have a wonderful group of panelists here today to talk about housing from a number of different angles. And then what we also want to do is have you all kind of add to that knowledge through conversations at the table. So I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, talking about affordable housing, market rate housing, frameworks for greater equity and access, public-private partnerships that have worked in other cities, and then to consider possibilities here in Scranton. And then we'll have a chance for you to ask questions of the panelists. And then we're going to break up and kind of have discussions around the table. We'll have a chance to hear a little bit from those discussions. We're also asking you to take notes, and you have facilitators at the table. And then Laura Duchessi of the Scranton Area Community Foundation is going to offer closing remarks. And Todd Polsey of NeighborWorks is going to help lead us in those discussions and those conversation kind of Q&A. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. So Marty Fotta is right here. He's been developing and overseeing United Neighborhood Community Development Corporation's residential housing projects over the past decade. He serves as Vice President of Community Development for UNC and UNCDC. He has worked on some of the most successful affordable housing communities in northeastern Pennsylvania. He has an MPA degree from Marywood University. He brings extensive knowledge related to zoning, planning, and land development and community revitalization. And then next is Sara Levy. She's an associate broker and regional sales manager at Classic Properties. She works as a realtor primarily in Lackawanna County, managing 2 offices and overseeing approximately $150 million in annual sales. She's a member of the Greater Scranton Board of Realtors and several different boards, including NeighborWorks, Jewish Family Services, and the Scranton Prep Alumni Board, and she's a graduate of the University of Connecticut. We'll hear next from Dana, but sitting right there is Eileen. So she is the director, Eileen Cipriani. She's the Director of Community Development for the City of Scranton. In this role, she oversees the Office of Community and Economic Development, the Bureau of Code Enforcement, City Planning and Zoning, and Grant Management. And she directs the city's HUD funding programs and has established both a Blight and Quality of Life Task Force. Prior to this role, she worked for the state as Deputy Secretary for Workforce Development at the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry. She also serves on several boards, including Scranton Tomorrow and Metro Action, and has a Bachelor of Science from Bloomsburg and a Master's from Misericordia. And then next is Dana Hanchin. She is President and CEO of HDC MidAtlantic. She has 25 years of experience in addressing the complex needs of lower income communities and leading affordable housing initiatives. Founded in 1971, HDC serves over 4,000 residents in 55 affordable housing communities, so across 3 states, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. And Dana has a master's degree in urban studies from Temple and a bachelor's degree in political science from Kent State. So I think we're really in great hands today to hear from our panelists on a range of different housing issues. So please join me in welcoming them and welcoming Marty to start things off.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Again, my name is Marty Fotta. I'm the Vice President of Community Development for United Neighborhood Centers and United Neighborhood Community Development Corporation. Just a little history about UNC. UNC started 100 years ago as a social service agency. We serve lots of needs of low-income people throughout Northeast Pennsylvania. But in 2006, we saw a need for the development of affordable housing. And a lot of our clients that was one of their biggest struggles was to find housing in the Scranton, Lackawanna County area. We thus formed the Community Development Corporation. Prior to 2006, there hadn't been any new affordable housing developments in Lackawanna County in over 20 years. Since then, we as United Neighborhood Community Development Corporation and several other developers have added to the affordable housing stock in the Scranton and Lackawanna County area. But where do we stand right now for affordable housing? So in the city of Scranton, there's 31 low-income housing complexes, ranging from 4 units all the way up to 200 units. In total, there's over 3,000 apartments for rent in these affordable communities. 1,866 are available to families, and 1,100 are available only to seniors who are 62 plus. So as you know, the wait lists at all of these communities are pretty extensive. We just opened a 36 apartment community in Carbondale called Fallbrook. We had over 150 people on the wait list before the building even started to accept applicants. And that need can be found really throughout Northeast Pennsylvania and throughout Scranton. In Scranton, only 48.5% of homes are owner-occupied, where the national average is 65%. So as you see, there's a huge rental market in Scranton, and regardless of the affordable housing communities that are available to folks, most really end up in market rate housing. And market rate housing really leads to higher rents, higher utilities, and generally lower standards for low-income people who are looking for these apartments. Nearly 75% of those living below the poverty line in Scranton are renters. That's no surprise. And really looking at the homeless community in Scranton, as of January of this year, there were 165 people who were listed as homeless in this area. When looking at disparities in affordable housing, this really should come as no surprise that it adversely impacts minorities and people of color in this area. While the general population for minorities is pretty low in the Scranton area, the amount of rental housing that they take up really is not equal to their share of the population. Let's see, there's some factors really that impact affordability in Scranton. I don't want to read through this whole entire thing, but as you can see, there's a need for not only affordable housing, but affordable housing for folks with disabilities and for folks that really have a tough time navigating the affordable housing landscape. So for many people, especially if English is your first language, it's much easier to find that housing and to find the resources that you need to access the housing. It's much more difficult for people who English is not their second language, and obviously for people who are working multiple jobs and can't access places like United Neighborhood Centers, places that are open typically your 9 to 5, Monday through Friday roles. But really, right now in 2021, we really have to look at how COVID has impacted affordable housing. Because prior to COVID, finding affordable housing in Scranton and Lackawanna County was very difficult. It's just become much more difficult as the price of rents have increased and the price of housing has increased. So what we've seen in the last year is a lot of houses that were affordable are coming off of the market. They've been purchased by investors. Some have been made into, multi-family units that have rents that are typically over $1,000 a month. Now, in the past year on the MLS, there's been 165 units for rent in the city of Scranton. The average for that is $1,032 for rent in the city. That's a really hard pill to swallow for people who might be making $15 an hour or really under $30,000 a year as a family. And as you see in this slide, the median family income in Scranton is only $54,000. So to really have rent that exceeds a third of your income is really a hardship on low-income people in this area. So what we've seen as United Neighborhood Centers, as we continue to develop affordable housing communities, is just an extreme need throughout Scranton and Lackawanna County. We've done market studies annually, and there's a constant need, especially for family housing, but also for senior housing as well. I'm gonna pass the mic here to Sara Levy, and we'll take questions afterwards.
Thanks, Marty. I'm going to pull my slide up here, but I want to give everyone a statistic that's not up here because it piggybacks a little bit on what Marty's saying. So over year to date, multifamily transactions in the city of Scranton, this isn't up here, the sold volume is up 143%, which is just an unheard of number. The sale price on those is up 36%, and the percentage sold is up 75%. So a lot of these multifamily properties are turning over. People are coming in from out of the area, they're buying them in packages, 30, 40 units at a time, and it's driving the rentals up because they're paying more for them. I can't say I know what they're doing with them. We don't have data on that. Are they managing them themselves? Are they, hiring local managers? Are they improving the properties? That's hard to say, but they're certainly driving the rents up on them, which is what's contributing to the, over $1,000 average rental price in the city. And I don't think any of that data you pulled were any of these newer projects like lofts downtown and any of that stuff. Most of that data is just multifamily properties throughout the city, owned by individuals. So anyway, moving on to some data. I'm going to try to interpret this for you a little bit. So this is what we call our 10K report, and it comes out every month. It shows a year-over-year average for the previous month and then a running 12-month average. It's hard to look at the month on its own as real good data because that could vary quite a bit. So if we look at the last 12 months in Lackawanna County, you can see our average sale price is up 13.5% in the county. If we go back to 2019, it was already up last year at this time. So over the last 5 years, that kind of lingered between like 140 and 150. So it was already up to 176 by October of last year, and now it's up again to 200. And days on market, of course, is down. Prices are being driven up. Listings are up a little bit because some people are becoming motivated to sell. The graph at the bottom, I think, is interesting. So just to explain this to you a little bit, the gray line is the entire MLS. Our Scranton MLS services Lackawanna, Wyoming, and Susquehanna counties. Lackawanna is really the primary on there, so most of these sales in the Scranton MLS come from Lackawanna County, though there are some other surrounding counties on there as well, which is why this graph, Lackawanna County is so close to the gray line. Month supply of inventory, so to kind of paint a picture for you, if we go back, again, like 4 or 5 years, there's been times where that's been at 12 months of inventory. So what that basically means is if we just paused the market right now and didn't list any more homes, how long until we absorbed the inventory that was there? To be under 2 months on that is a huge challenge. I mean, that's a really, I've never seen month supply that low. So specifically in the city of Scranton, if we look at the last 12 months, the average sale price is up to $136,000. Again, to kind of paint some broad strokes for you, if we look at like over the last 12 to 15 years, a normal price appreciation would be anywhere from 1.5% to 2%. So basically, in the last 12 to 15 months, we've appreciated 12 to 15 years worth as far as a price range goes, which is, it's unsustainable. One, I mean, I can't keep going up and up and up. The $1 million question is, when does it stop? I don't know. I think we're plateauing right now, but I certainly don't think it's gonna plummet. What this has done for affordable housing is houses that were $100,000, 2 and 3 years ago that were affordable and they were good housing in the city is now $125,000, $130,000 to get that same house, and it's pricing people out of the market for good housing. The other challenge we're seeing with sales is the competition. So you have a house on the market that's $125,000 and you have 10 buyers for it. If you're not the strongest buyer financially, you can't compete. So when we have these programs like through NeighborWorks and different places that are trying to help people get into affordable housing and providing them grants and aid, it's almost hard to give the money away because it's hard to get that buyer in the house because they may be competing against someone coming in from out of the area who has cash or who has significant amount of cash in the transaction, and then that buyer becomes just a weaker buyer. And if you're a seller, sometimes it's more about the sure thing of going with the buyer that is going to close and taking the chance on someone else. Not always, but that's what I've seen on that. And as you can see, the listings are up a little bit, which is good. Closed sales are up quite a bit, and the average sale price, which is really what is pricing people out of the market. This isn't data driven, this is just personal experience I'll share. I see a lot of people coming in, like Julie was saying, in her neighborhood, coming in from out of the area. Like, that's the question everyone asks me. Is everyone from New York that's coming? No, but there's a lot of people. And I would say like in the under 200 price point, we are seeing people that aren't necessarily from the area but are coming into the area, because even though for us this is a 23-24% inflation, it's still significantly more affordable for them who have jobs outside the area and can afford it. So that's what our local population is kind of competing against a little bit, which is a challenge. And then this is the same data from the previous graph, specific to the city of Scranton. So you can see where the city and the blue line compares against the entire MLS, which is predominantly Lackawanna County. It goes all the way back to, it starts in 2016, so you can kind of tell visually the gap that the city had with the rest of the area as far as a price point goes, and it's closing as we're moving. It's keeping up, and it's catching up to the area as a whole. When I started, 15 years ago, the average sale price in Scranton was like $80,000. So in 15 years to be at 135, and most of that coming in the last year and a half, that's a lot of inflation that is going to continue to be a challenge for people trying to buy. So now they're forced into the rentals that are also inflated, and unfortunately may cost them more than home ownership does. Thank you.
We're out of order.
We're out of order.
We're out of order. That's been said about me many times. You're up, unless you'd like me to give you a presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Many of you, actually, most of you may not know HDC, and I was invited to participate in this session by Jesse Aragot of Northeast Pennsylvania NeighborWorks. HDC is also a NeighborWorks member, and I am a fan of, I think there's a fan club for Jesse, so when he asked me to come up and share sort of HDC's point of view around how we approach housing, I was happy to do that, and especially in terms of an equity lens. And there's some reason for our sort of being here today as well, because HDC, as Julie has shared, we are in 3 states, and we serve 55 communities, 4,000 residents, and manage and own over 3,000 apartments. And we're also in Northeast. We have 2 communities in Luzerne County, in Wilkes-Barre, and in Exeter. And we're looking to grow here in Lackawanna County as well as the region. I'm going to go ahead and sort of move through my slides. So we are celebrating 50 years, and so I know that Terry Ohms is also in the room, so I'm going to give some really big numbers, and I don't want her to test me on them, but 50,000 residents we have helped over 50 years find a place to call home. $325 million of investment across 3 states, calculating to be an estimated amount of almost $1 billion in economic impact. So pretty powerful numbers. But as I hear today, and as I've been in this work for 25 years, it's a game of whack-a-mole when we think about it, right? If you've been around long enough, we're constantly asking, how to address the need, what are the solutions that are available, the resources, the stagnant wages, the complex lives that most low-income and low-resourced families and individuals lead. What are we going to be doing to sort of, how can we be changing that? It's sort of a reoccurring question over and over again. And I've been part of HDC for about 3.5 years, doing most of my affordable housing work in the city of Philadelphia, and coming to lead an organization to really think about how we can create change in the long term, as well as deal with the bricks and sticks of managing and building housing every day. And for us, we begin looking deeper around what is our role as a nonprofit and as a mission to address affordable housing, to think about those systemic issues that sort of created and exacerbated the situation that we have. So we primarily work in 3 spheres: develop affordable housing, like Marty, manage affordable housing, and we also provide on-site resident services. And this is our footprint in Pennsylvania, so you can take a look at where we are. Most of our portfolio is in Pennsylvania. We are looking to grow in this region. We are actually in negotiation with the Diocese of Scranton to step in and take over their low-income affordable housing portfolio. And we're hopeful that through today and through many conversations, that we can continue to be part of the need to address affordable housing in the region. We really recognize the value as a practitioner and a technician of working with community partners on the ground and really listening to the need and ways that we can be helpful with what we know and how to do this work and how to create a better impact. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of our approach to that and some of the learnings. I think I was asked to talk about best practices, and I'm hesitant to think that there are best practices, that we are just trying things on, and I can share with you that our lessons learned, and you can think about that framework as you, as we look to find solutions to how to address that here in Scranton. So firstly, it's just recognizing that We have a role in understanding the systemic barriers that are in place and the historical discrimination that people of color, communities of color have faced over 400 years in this nation. And affordable housing is a very clear, in terms of us, for our mission, how that has affected access to opportunity and the barriers that are put in place. And that continues to perpetuate how we address the need in our communities and how communities were created and also isolated. We see this as a journey and one that will never end. We're learners in this work. Somehow we keep being asked to talk about how we're leading this work. I'm hesitant to say that we're a leader. We're continually learning, failing, making mistakes, and figuring out, again, what else we can be doing differently. So when we think about equity and how we approach our work, we are often asking the questions: whose voice is included, whose voice isn't, who has power, what are the intended outcomes, and then some of the unintended consequences that we may not anticipate. So even as we're in this room today talking about the state of housing in Scranton and talking about solutions, asking ourselves, who's in the room today? Who has lived experience? Who's helping to shape these discussions and thinking about solutions? And are they being heard, and do they have power? That is the way that HDC is starting to reframe our work in terms of addressing the need for affordable housing. So some of the ways that we're doing that, as I said, recent practices in equity. Again, we believe in working with community partners on the ground, and community engagement is the first step in terms of addressing the need. And the conversations that you're having in communities. Earlier this year in August, Duchessi and I met with many people in the organization, in the city and in the region about affordable housing, introducing HDC to partners to learn about what they're doing and how we can be helpful, and our commitment to be in this work in the long term with you. And that's in terms of a stakeholder perspective, but also in terms of a resident perspective or intended resident perspective. We look to engage throughout the process in terms of the planning and design of development. And I think that is one of the things that we'll be doing in terms of increasing access and also removing barriers, is to talk to folks who have that lived experience, who have a sense of the community and what their needs are, and how we can be addressing that in the design and development of affordable housing. We often hold charrettes with our residents in terms of understanding what we can be doing differently, what are their needs, what are some non-negotiables, and how, again, just our design is getting in the way of creating housing that is welcoming, safe, accessible, and meets the needs of the residents. We also have looked at our resident selection process. If you think, in what ways can we really affect change? And for us at HDC, I'll just give you another mic. See if the other mic. All right, sorry for the crackle.
Sorry about
Let's try this one.
Unhappy mics.
So we looked for immediate ways we can affect change, and we looked at our resident selection process. We looked at what we're requiring of, still crackling.
Yeah,
so.
it's still crackling. I'm sorry, guys. Give me 1 second to see if I can just turn off the sound. Testing. Quieter. All right. So one of the ways we looked at it internally is saying, what are we asking of the applicants who are applying for housing? So we think about the need. You talked about the waiting list. Oftentimes people are on the waiting list and then they have to go through a credit check and a criminal background check, often getting rejected even before they have an opportunity to tell their story. And so we looked really hard at our own practices and making sure that we weren't actually in the way of being able to understand a resident's or applicant's story in accessing affordable housing. That sometimes when you have blanket policies, it can lead to disparate impact. And we took a really hard look at what we were requiring of our residents and giving them an opportunity to share their story first before we determine whether or not they were fit for our communities. And that was the same in terms of a credit history and credit check. So we turned around the way that we were doing our resident selection, not to automatically just reject somebody because they have a background, but to really say, hey, can we sit down and do an individualized assessment of where you are and how you would fit in our community? So that's another way to take a look at equity when you're looking at affordable housing. I mean, I think when Marty mentioned the wait list, I just wanted to share with our 55 communities, we've had to close 18 of our wait lists of those properties. So for 3,000 units, we have over 3,000 individuals waiting for that housing. So we know the need is there.
the state, we see it every day, hundreds of inquiries a day for affordable housing that we can't meet. The other important component for us in thinking about equity is also around resident leadership. So again, we're not just about providing housing and having tenants, but those tenants are our residents, those residents are neighbors, and those neighbors build communities. And what are the ways that we can be supporting individuals who live within our communities to understand their voice and power to affect change? And that may start very small in terms of looking at a project within the development or within their neighborhood that they want to work on, and then think about how they advocate for their needs beyond that, and what are the tools and supports we can provide so we can create future leaders, so those leaders can be at this table talking about solutions. The two other components that I wanted to share are really operational for HDC, and I think in terms of the organizations that you may represent is that we look deeper in terms of our equity and pay and understanding, again, our responsibility as a nonprofit to ensure that we're paying livable wages and that our employees actually aren't eligible applicants for our housing. There's a contradiction there, and we wanted to recognize that and figure out how to get everyone to a place of where we were living our mission with our employees as well as with our residents. So we just completed that process this year, and we're really excited about making those adjustments to then again live what we believe is around equity. Still crackling. But I'm almost done. Are you gonna just bear with the crackle? I mean, we've done it so far. All right. The other thing I wanted to share just is about supplier diversity. For HDC, we have over $100 million in assets with 55 communities. So we build housing, there's construction costs, there's our operational costs, and we analyze that we have roughly discretionary spend about $2.5 million a month that we have control over. And if there's one way we can think about equity, it's thinking about we want to do business with people that support our values, and then also to be able to create economic opportunity for minority, women, and other disadvantaged communities. So we are launching a supplier diversity program. I know many universities and hospitals have those procurement systems, but for us, it felt like a real way that we could create meaningful change and get out in front of it, because we control. You control the money, we can control who we support with that money. And lastly, I just want to talk about sort of things that to advocate for, whether it's in affordable housing or economic development projects, whether or not you are in the private market or in the nonprofit sphere. There are things I think we can be asking our developers to consider that may not have implications, right? So we think about how do we address this problem? Well, we need more resources. But there are other things that we can be advocating for that will also address equity. And in the community that we're based in Lancaster, we've been working with a group called Lancaster Equity CDC to think about sort of an equity impact index, and they're encouraging developers to think about what are the things that you can do right now to support equity if they don't know exactly how to tackle it. So this is sort of our top 10 list. It seems pretty self-explanatory when you read it, and it's like the increased crackles happening, so I'm just gonna stop talking and turn it over to Eileen.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Good. Well, it's a real honor for me to be here today to represent the city and Mayor Cognetti. And one of the things that is a top priority for the mayor is affordable quality housing in the city of Scranton. And we have geared a significant amount of our initiatives in order to try and make that a reality in the city. One of the things that the mayor has done at the start of her administration is she reorganized us a little bit. The Office of Economic and Community Development was separate, and now we've developed the Office of Community Development, which develops not only OECD, but often licensing, planning, inspection, zoning, and grant writing in the city of Scranton. And this triangulation has actually proved to be very fruitful, because because all of these elements of the city intersect constantly every day. And we've been able to make a lot of changes by working together. I just want to acknowledge that 3/4 of OECD staff is actually here today to be able to hear what's going on in the city, because they're very invested in this, as everyone else is. So I wanted to talk about a few of the innovative things that we're doing in the city. Maybe they're not completely innovative, but we're really trying to move the needle and make a difference. And we talked a lot this morning about equity, and we have an RFP out on the street to hire a vendor to have an equity plan for the city of Scranton. We want to look at who are we funding, what are we funding them for, where are we funding them in the city, and is that impactful? Are we moving the needle? And we will use this equity lens to sit on top of all of our programs and all of our grant funding that we'll push out. A couple programs that we've had, they've been in existence for a while, but we've looked at them, looked at where maybe there were flaws, where they weren't working, and started to retool them. One is our home rehabilitation program, which has been stalled for a little bit of time, and in part because it was very difficult to find contractors who wanted to do jobs that were smaller jobs. So we've partnered over the summer with Johnson College. It's a win-win on both sides. So the students can be able to get real-life hands-on experience, their instructors lead the operation, and residents of the city can have home repairs to bring their property up to code. Next year, we have $400,000 ready to go in this program, which will help about 15 families in the city. One of the other things we're working to be a better partner in is beautiful blocks. NeighborWorks does a phenomenal job. This is a phenomenal program in the city. We want the city to be a bigger participant in it. We're putting money back into the actual city budget in order to help fund it. Plus, the Office of Economic and Community Development is investing $40,000 to help individuals with low to moderate income put their share of the funding in to be able to rehab and beautify their home. It's a 2-to-1 ratio of funding that comes in. So it was difficult for individuals who didn't have the funds to begin with to do, to painting and landscaping work around their house. So this should broaden that and make that more available to a larger group of people. We talked about it a little bit before. We have a home buyer program, and it is true. Often access to this program and pushing the money out is a challenge. And what we find often is the prices of the homes have gone up precipitously, but people's incomes haven't gone up to match. So they have a very difficult time trying to get funding from the bank in order to make this work because of the income eligibility of HUD. Despite that, we've gone from we're up to, how many, Liza? How many properties did we do this year?
We're at 17 this year?
17 this year. So, I mean, that's really a phenomenal shift to be able to increase that. We've over doubled it from previous years. And, again, it's us partnering with NeighborWorks. The partnering has been very effective with our Office of Community and Economic Development. We don't have the people resources, so having great community partners has been a really big help to us. A couple other things. Since we're able to take community development and expand that with code enforcement underneath, we can look at this from a different lens than everybody else looks at it. The price of the houses have gone up, but the quality of the houses in many cases have not. People are paying a higher amount for their rent, but the house still is in pretty rough shape. So how do we deal with that? And that's where code enforcement comes in. So in our code enforcement, what we've done is we've gone from a paper spreadsheet system to a totally computerized system. We're arming our code enforcement housing inspectors with tablets so they could go out and work in the street in real time. We'll be able to track data, track neighborhoods where situations are not difficult. We'll be able to do real-time data to be able to really be proactive. I've said this last night when I testified at the council meeting, that the goal in code enforcement is to never have anybody complain to us. That we drive around, we find the complaints, and I know that's an aspirational goal, but we find the complaints and resolve them right on the spot. So that is a big shift that we've had. It's a cultural shift to go from a paper system and Excel spreadsheet system to being totally technology driven. So hats off to our inspectors. They're doing a really, really good job with that. Lastly, and Brenda Pace is here with us today, she's in charge of our demolition program. And for several years, there's been no demolition in the city of Scranton. We stopped, we went through, we process mapped what we did, found out all the hiccups along the way and retooled it. And the last 2 years, we've demolished 25 properties in the city of Scranton. And there's a lot more to do. But what I found to be so impactful about that, besides the fact that demolishing a blighted house on a block with other great houses totally changes the neighborhood, what's been really impactful is that now when the city sends out a notice, people respond, right? Because they know that it's actually going to happen. And we actually had one property owner that we had taken to court. He had received a demolition notice and he said to us, he never thought we'd actually act on it because we hadn't acted on it in 6 years, and we demolished his house. So, you know, it's the fact that we're following through on what we're doing. In the code enforcement department, now that we've gone to the open gov system, if our code enforcement inspectors do not act on something in 14 days, I get an email on it, and I could send them an email and ask them what we do with it. So it's totally changed the culture of how we work, how we're accountable, and how we follow up on things. And that's been a big priority of the mayor, to make sure that we're taking care of the blighted neighborhoods and that, you know, we're really helping to drive quality affordable housing. The other thing that's going on that's big is the SAPA plan. So all of our neighboring municipalities around us working to improve our zoning regulations. Hopefully by the end of the year, the city will pass the SAPA plan. And one of the things that I just want to note from the plan is historically, the plan was more driven by single-family homes. The plan now allows for more mixed use and multifamily homes, especially along main corridors of the city. And we're hopeful that this will bring more equity into housing and allow for more development of more affordable housing in our city neighborhoods. Last, I want to talk about opportunity. And Julie mentioned it before, the city coming out of Act 47 after 30 years in Act 47. I believe when we come out, it'll have been 30 years in one day in Act 47. But, you know, the previous engagement, we were talking about only a few years ago, look at the myriad of problems that we have and say, boy, we have no money. How are we going to solve all these problems? And now we have a different situation where we have an opportunity for a lot of money. The city's getting $68 million in ARPA funding. That's a huge investment in the city of Scranton. The infrastructure bill has just passed. I mentioned we're leaving Act 47. We've gotten ARPA home dollars. The state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, will also be getting funding through the infrastructure bill that we will be able to apply for. So now we look at this situation and say, well, we have this great opportunity over here. What should we do? And it's very important to all of us that we get everybody's opinion. We need to make really good, sound, practical decisions that are systemic, changing the system, right? We don't, I'll read about different municipalities decided to try and reduce the garbage fee or pay for garbage bags or something. That doesn't make sense. We need to do something that's systemic, that's sustainable, and that changes and benefits the quality of life for everybody that lives in the city of Scranton. So some of the things that we're looking at, some of them are really easy. I just mentioned a number of programs like the home buyer program, the home rehab program, our demolition. We'll be able to fund those in a higher degree with the ARPA funding. And one of the benefits is funding we use now is HUD funding, so it has a lot of income eligibility rules. We'll be able to expand that field that we are actually able to operate in because we won't have those same rules and regulations sitting on top of it. You know, it's often frustrating. The lower threshold for the home buyer program is as low as $39,000. Well, if you're making $42,000, you probably still can't afford that house. It's not that big of a difference, but we're not able to help those folks. So now, how could we use this funding to make a difference for a broader and wider scale of folks? Two other things that I just want to mention that we're doing that don't involve funding is we're retooling the quality of life ordinance. We've had multiple quality of life task force. We're going to participate tomorrow in the Neighborhood Forum to talk about residents, what's going on in your neighborhood, how could we fix it, how could we change this the rules that we have, the regulations that we have. You know, maybe the fee structure, whatever it is, we need to be more effective to get some of the troublesome residents in town to be compliant. So we're looking at the quality of life ordinance. And the last thing that I'll mention that we're doing is looking at the rental registration ordinance. Really, we're probably going to put together a task force and just start all over with that regulations. It's really not working for us in the city. We have, you know, as we mentioned before, we believe as many as 17,000 rental properties in the city, and we have track of very few of them. So what we need to be able to do is put the brakes on, go back, take a deep dive, bring together groups of individuals, and let's talk about what we need to do to correct some of the flaws that we have in the city. Thank you, and thank everybody for your time and attention.
I learned I'm not even going to touch the microphones. I'm Todd Boosley. I'm with Neighborhood Centers of Pennsylvania. Please join me one more time in thanking our panelists. We do have time for one or two questions for the panelists. So, anybody have a burning question you want to ask? Not.
For the city of Scranton, I'm wondering what qualifications are looked into and training for clients.
Good question. Actually, for many years in their collective bargaining agreement, there have been stipulations that they would have to go and have the ICC Housing Inspector certification. So we are enforcing that now. So within 18 months, well, it's less than 18 now, it's about a year, they will all have to be certified or they get furloughed.
Well, my question is for the city of Scranton. And we almost asked this question. Alleyways and courts need to be cleaned up. We need to take some of that $68 million and use it cleaning up the alleyways and courts.
Okay.
Being at Johnson College in the Dixon City, how does that work with them working within the confines of Scranton, being that you need to be a Scranton contractor?
Technically, I believe they are in the city of Scranton.
They are.
Yeah.
Question for HDC. What is this magical money that you're able to find to do these fantastic projects? Because often, especially in our local area, we under federal and state guidelines as Eileen, but it's the restrictions are there, and it becomes so difficult to actually house in a dignified way our marginalized population. Where are you getting those funds from?
Well, it's not really magic. It's actually the same. It's a program that's available. The only federal program dedicated to affordable rental housing is a low-income housing tax credit program, which is underfunded and actually is, you know, hopefully if the Build Back Better plan gets approved, that there'll be more resources to access those credits, and then you piecemeal money from the city, whether it's home or leveraging ARPA to fill the gaps. So it's not magical. It's a lot of pain and suffering, and it takes a long time. And we've been around a long time, so we can show those big impact numbers, but it takes almost 3 to 4 years to complete 60 units or 75 units of housing. But we are shifting our approach, which is it feels like a more holistic in terms of impact, right? So it's not just again about bricks and mortar.
What constitutes affordable housing? Is it income driven? How does that work? Because I know that I've been in touch with some of the County wages and usually that income level, you're no longer eligible for anything. So what constitutes affordable housing?
So I can speak on that. So typically, as Dana mentioned with the low-income housing tax credit program, it has to be 60% or lower of the area median income. Now, for public housing, it can be a little bit higher, but typically it is 60% or lower of area median income. The area median income for the Scranton area for a family of 4 is $34,000 a year.
Keeping in mind that, we're on halfway right now in Pennsylvania to increase the minimum wage gradually over the next couple of years. And, alleviating some of this backlog isn't just building new properties, but having rental turnover. And a lot of times people end up in properties and then stay. What are some avenues that you guys are exploring to create that turnover and facilitate in advance people being able to transition out of the assisted housing and into the current market?
So I'll just talk a little bit about our value around choice, which is part of also our trauma-informed approach, that people who live in HDC housing can choose to stay as long as they want, and we can also support them in what other goals that they have. So through the low-income housing tax credit program, there is an opportunity at the end of the compliance period to offer renters to purchase those apartments or homes and become homeowners. Through dedicated support services, we have resident services coordinators that work with our families and seniors on whatever other goals they may be having, whether it's moving to unsubsidized housing or buying their own home or just stabilizing. So we know how hard people work to find affordable housing, and we know how hard it is to keep when you have one incident or emergency happen. I mean, COVID is sort of a testament to sort of the instability that's created when you're sort of on the cusp of stability. So for us, I think we're working with residents where they are and supporting what their goals are, but having housing stability and committing to work along with them for however long they need to determine that goal is our approach. And we have helped a number of our residents move on to home ownership or move out, but it is, again, our residents choose to live with us and they choose to stay, or they can choose to leave.
I'd like to comment on that. So another benefit of the low-income housing tax credit program, as opposed to public housing, so public housing, you pay a certain percentage of your income towards your rent. For tax credit projects, you pay a set rent, and that doesn't increase based on your income. So if someone moves in and they're making $34,000 a year, if over the course of 2 or 3 years you end up making, say, $50,000 or $60,000 a year, it doesn't mean that your rent will go up. So it's one of the perks of the program, and it allows families to actually build their income and their savings. So hopefully they would be able to buy a house, or really it just allows them to use their money wisely.
So we're gonna shift gears a little bit here now. We're gonna have probably take the next 25 minutes or so in smaller groups. So at your table, there's a facilitator designated. They'll introduce themselves. It's going to lead a small group discussion with all of you for 25 minutes or so. All right, can I have everybody's attention, please? I want to thank everybody for having some what I know are some great conversations at your small groups here. We unfortunately don't have time for every table to share out, but we do have a couple of minutes. If anybody wants to share anything, take 30 seconds to share something that was discussed at your table. We'll do that quickly. Donna.
But I'll try. I just wanted to share something that we've been talking a little bit about here, is that how we were looking at number 3, but affordable childcare is a barrier to housing, affordable housing, because we were just talking about newborns and where do some of these parents go and who's helping them, and then you can't get a job, what was the thing, 6 months after. You have to have a job for 6 months until you're eligible to apply for certain kinds of housing. And how do you do that if you don't have anyone to watch your child or you're in some kind of temporary housing? So just, there's so many more things than just the obvious things that we think about. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thanks, Donna. Great point. Maybe one more?
We talked, it's okay. We talked about the whole notion of economic security, how it's different for everybody, depending on your background and where you come from. We said how oftentimes you have to start at the bottom. In other words, like your own personal, individual security. And then if you have that, then you can move up and move out to do more. And we talked about family sustaining jobs as well in order to have that economic security. And that's a challenge that we have.
Thank you very much. So if anybody, hopefully every table took some notes as well during the conversations. If you could leave your notes on the table, that would be really helpful. Julie's going to have all of those collected. We'll type them up. We'll get them out to everybody here so that you can see what everybody chatted about. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Duchessi from the Scranton Area Community Foundation to close us out.
Give it a whirl with the microphone. Thank you, everyone. It was great conversation at the table. I think a lot of themes that came out of that, and I know we're all hopeful that a lot of this dialogue will be useful in some of the things I'm going to talk about. Most of you in this room I do know. I'm Lori Duchessi. I'm president of the Scranton Area Community Foundation. We're proud to co-sponsor the State of Scranton Housing, along with the University of Scranton and NeighborWorks NEPA. We want to particularly thank the University of Scranton for hosting us today for this extremely important conversation, and to all of you who came out specifically to talk about this and to share your expertise and insight and thoughts as we move forward and think about, well, what is next? And so a little bit about the Scranton Area Community Foundation. The Scranton Area Community Foundation embarked upon our second strategic plan in the end of 2020, where we focused on, establishing where we are as an organization in terms of our pillars, our objectives, and our strategies that go beyond from that. And I'm sure many of your organizations do the same thing. One of these key pillars that we established was that of a catalyst and convener, prioritizing community initiatives that matter to our region, that matter to our stakeholders, nonprofits, those in the community we serve, our philanthropic constituents, our donors. And from that, where we can potentially serve as an anchor of change, an anchor of growth around those areas. As an anchor institution, could be an educational institution, it can be so many things, but the Community Foundation is also an anchor institution, and that has been prioritized by our board to do that. So I want to say, when I reiterate today, that the Community Foundation is a true partner. We want to be a partner as we advance this critical issue of affordable housing, attainable housing, and accessible housing. We know, and we've discussed at our tables today, that affordable and attainable housing is critical to the well-being of individuals and communities and to the economic vitality of our region. We heard that in so many of the wonderful panelist presentations today, specific details about how all of this intersects in Scranton and what particularly we could move forward on as we look to take this into some actionable solutions. At the individual level, we realize it impacts students' ability to obtain an education, to feel safe in their home and in school. We know it impacts physical health, it impacts behavioral health. It is an equity issue in terms of accessibility, ability to access affordable housing in terms of being eligible to purchase a home, being able to actually afford rent, etc. We know it's at a macro level, we know it's an economic issue in terms of basically being competitive as a region, competitive for employees, competitive for employers. We know, it's an issue of people being able to be close to their jobs, transportation, access, commute time. There's so many mitigating factors for which affordable and attainable housing is truly the core. And so our table, when we talked a little bit about economic security, there's so many factors that play into that: housing, transportation, workforce. I think we at the foundation, and so many of us, probably view all of these themes as truly inseparable. So we're here today because we believe in the importance of attainable housing. Today we worked further to identify homeownership barriers, supply and demand challenges, and other disparities. We identified Scranton's strengths, so many of which were highlighted at our table and within Eileen's discussion about the opportunities that exist in front of us that we can leverage if we think strategically and we create effective partnerships to do that. We identified potentially the what's next in our collective process, individual themes that came up, and what I'm hopeful will be a larger collaborative working towards this that has collective power in this area. We talked about making sure that we have to identify who is not at our tables and who needs to be, to make sure that our process and our outcome is equitable and inclusive. And we want to hear from those that do not feel that they are being served within our communities so that we can further shape our strategy. So the Scranton Area Community Foundation sees value in shaping a collective strategy on affordable housing at a regional and/or a city level. We've done this in areas such as equitable transportation through our work in NEPA Moves, which is a collaborative that we established several years ago with over 100 partners from mass transit, the nonprofit sector, healthcare, industry, et cetera, working towards issues in transportation. And what we learned through this process is that transportation, again, is completely inseparable from areas such as affordable housing, from workforce. So what came out of that was a conversation, a roundtable that we then held with so many of our partners here today, the University of Scranton, Geisinger, NeighborWorks, NEPA, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, the Lackawanna Housing Collaborative, and the University of Scranton, where we met to talk about, what is needed in terms of affordable housing in our region. And from that roundtable, several priority issues were identified, but what came out of that is the establishment of something that Julie referred to, which was a cohort that went through a program called Reinventing Our Communities. It was a Lackawanna County cohort that was selected for this. And what we did through this was we took a deep dive over a 6-month period by basically receiving training from an organization called the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And we learned through that, and through some of the amazing work from our partner, the Institute, that we really needed to further understand the impact on equity. In this sphere, we needed to do a study on redlining to understand specifically how that impacted the housing, the history in our region. And we needed to think about how to really do create a much more focused effort in connecting with the neighborhoods and individuals from communities of color in our region that can really inform our discussion and be a key part of this collaborative going forward that we are hoping our cohort expands to. On a broader scale, this collaborative informed at the community foundation level a true focus on what we want to be a collective strategy on racial equity. We're hoping in early 2022 to start some key discussions in various counties that are going to be cross-sector, focusing on how we can shape a regional strategy in terms of racial equity. And I say that because I'm hoping what comes out of that is a plan that we can take to other funders to then say, here are some areas of opportunity, potentially affordable and attainable housing and other areas within that we could then put out and say, these are opportunities that need to be focused on, that needs to be invested in. We took that information from the cohort learning process and said, okay, now we're going to move into Women in Philanthropy, which is a collective philanthropy effort at the Scranton Area Foundation that has been in existence since 2014, and said, one of the things that we're learning is that when we're looking forward into priority areas of interest, what we're going to announce tomorrow night to our group is that affordable and attainable housing is going to be one of those priority areas that we could then work collaboratively on, advance advocacy issue for, and invest in. And Women in Philanthropy is truly a group that is all about collective philanthropy, building collaboratives, working with partners, etc. So I guess I'm saying all of this because I'm trying to illustrate that, as a catalyst and a convener, the Scranton Area Community Foundation is committed to continuing to convene and affirm the conversations that have been said today at what we're hoping becomes a broader scale. What we want to take is all of the achievements that we've started, all of the action that we've started within the Lackawanna County cohort level, the discussion that Julie referred to, and build upon that into an equitable housing collaborative. There's no coincidence that I'm mentioning it today. I'm mentioning it today because it is truly an effort that we're hoping to launch in early 2022, and we want it to be intentional, and there's a lot of goals that we're hoping come out of that, many of them which were so well illustrated in our panel discussions. For example, we're hoping that this collaborative can focus on large-scale, equitable solutions that create what we all want, systemic change. Focusing on public philanthropic partnerships, fund development, advocacy and policy change, tenant and landlord education, partnerships with financial institutions for more equitable opportunities, conversations with developers, and many more objectives as determined by this collaborative. So I know many of today's panelists, many of you in the audience, are working and have been working in this sector and so many sectors that impact the housing sector. And I truly look forward to, as so many of my colleagues at the foundation is drawing from your experience and your expertise for this. So I wanted to mention that. I wanted to say that is coming. I wanted to thank the university, NeighborWorks, NEPA, and our panelists today for this incredible discussion. I think there's a lot of legs that can come from this, and thank you for showing up today and every day. Okay, thanks very much.